or a hands-off approach, and when to decide what hand to employ and how it best suits our industry. It's pretty simple. If we want to grow the wildlife economy, we need to outperform other land use options. Point blank done. We have not taken land as private game ranches from protected areas and converted them into hunting farms. We've taken marginal agricultural land and converted them. So if I can make more money with cattle, if I can make more money with grain, what's going to happen? I'm going to convert back to cattle or grain. That's the gist of the model that we sit with. And that's how we look at it. We need to ensure that the money we generate from wildlife outperforms other agricultural land use options. And that I view as my number one goal as the CEO. So firstly, TOPS. No, we're not talking about TOPS at Spa, the lacquer TOPS. We're talking about the TOPS regulations that, thank goodness, the Minister eventually agreed on the last hour of the urgent court application that we had brought to repeal. So what happened is, a lot of you would be aware that the 1st of April, it's a nice April Fool's joke, we had our new TOPS regulations that were due to come in. WRSA evaluated it and decided we cannot live with these TOPS regulations, although there were some positive things. Positive things such as one, veterinarians were given carte blanche in terms of darting top species for emergency circumstances. We have had a few meetings with members of the South African Veterinary Wildlife Group, and we made the point clear. It doesn't help you as a vet have got carte blanche to dart any animal for veterinary purposes, but I as a farmer cannot move those animals. Who's going to pay your bill? Are you going to get it from the state? So if I can't move an animal, how am I going to pay your bill to treat it and to work with it? The second industry that had benefits was the taxidermy industry, that trophies were now exempted under TOPS. That was also a concern that we addressed, and we spoke with them, excuse me, but we did work out a way of taking that forward, where we'll now be putting lots of pressure on the government to allow them self-administration, as well as with the Veterinary Council. So the question we asked is, what benefits has TOPS brought for the industry since its implementation in 2007? We know with the private rhino, we now sit with 65% of the world's rhino population. Why? Because Kruger National Park's lost 75%. Has TOPS protected Kruger National Park's rhino over the last 10 years? Of course not. So what benefit has TOPS brought to us as game ranchers? Has it increased the benefit that we have for our species? And it doesn't. Secondly, we raised our challenge based on insufficient data. Now, many of you will be aware of what they call the IUCN Red List or the Red Data List assessment. We are sitting with a situation, and I purposely use the example here of a sable antelope. Sable were listed on the TOPS regulations as vulnerable because according to their data, there's only 1,346 sable antelope in the whole country. But on auctions over the last 20 years, we've sold 18,818, thanks to the data that we got from Johan de Tooy from AWA. So how come have we sold so many, but we only have 1,300? And it's simple. They only consider animals that are in wild or in their natural distribution range as contributing to the conservation status. So everyone, most of us as game ranchers, we are not viewed as contributing to conservation, so they blatantly don't count our animals. And that's why we view it so important to create a WRSA portal that references it. So this is a slide that I've used on numerous occasions to government. I've asked them, where is the wild in South Africa? And some of you might recognize this is out of Kruger. Because if you look at the agricultural area of South Africa, you've got grain, sugar, forestry, vegetables, fruit, cattle, sheep, diverse, etc. Where's wildlife? There's only none, which is considered Kruger. So where must we flourish as an industry? We then throw this slide in their face to say, but is this really wild? Kruger National Park, is it really wild? And we heard the stat today about Kruger National Park's buffalo. What conservation value do the buffalo or the lion have in Kruger National Park? We know 80% of the buffalo show FMD. 80% of the lions that they tested in Kruger National Park are contaminated with TB. So does that really have a conservation status for wild and wildness? We spoke about the sable, that 97% of the sable antelope are found on privately farmed land. And what's happened to other countries that is considered wild? Let's talk about Kenya. Kenya's only got 51 sable left, but those are wild. They've only got 15 roan antelope left, but those are wild. We know about the mismanagement that took place in Kruger with their roan antelope that were left to dry, but those are considered wild. Our roan antelope are not. So that was a huge concern for us. Thirdly was the legislative vacuum that was created. I don't know how many of you are aware, and this is where I want to thank all the former directors of WRSA for the hard work they did. In 2013, we had a public participation process where there was no definition, for semi-extensive game farms, and the IUCN Red List status was in there. In 2015, because of the hard work that was done in 2013, these definitions were brought in for us. 8 years later, with the final gazetted version, it was removed. So game farms were totally removed and semi-extensive were totally removed in the process. And the concern was for us with TOPS regulations, yes, you could register as a TOPS registered game ranch, put up one fence for management for rotational grazing, you lose your registration, just like that. Do any form of felt management, you lose your registration, just like that, based on TOPS. What was also a huge concern is the first definition in 2015 had the IUCN Red List status, which defined that as a conservation status of the IUCN. In the latest version, they changed the definition to conservation status, as defined by the IUCN. So the risk that would have imposed on us as game ranchers is that we would have to show conservation status to the IUCN before we could get any permits to do anything. Now, if they already don't recognize us, how are we going to show that conservation status? So we are giving an international NGO carte blanche over our regulations based on their animals red list assessment that was done by an EWT and SANBI in 2016. What was also interesting, this data was not factored into the report. They were working on data from 2001 to determine the top species, data that's outdated by an excess of 20 years. We also asked, with the hands-off, hands-on, if we talk about elephant are considered CITES Appendix 2, and they're considered least concerned by the IUCN Red Data List assessment. So why were they on TOPS? No, because they're an iconic animal, we are told. So we used this joke and we said, but please explain, how can an animal be endangered that we need to protect it and we're not allowed to utilize it, but at the same time we're giving it contraceptives to stop it breeding? It's either endangered and we need to grow the population, or it's abundant and we need to reduce the population. It can't be both, which there wasn't an answer for. We also raised the thing about, is all animals more equal than other animals, as per George Orwell, asking the question about where our wildlife sits. The public participation I already briefly alluded to, that it was in 2013, then 2015, and then 8 years later, nothing. And this is what we're sitting with the department at the moment. They have to hear us, but they don't have to listen to us. So they have to engage with us in public platforms, but they don't have to implement what we say. And that's why it's become so crucial that we've started working with key role players in putting everything down on paper in black and white that we can show what we're doing. And then lastly, we sat with the lack of capacity with the government. Every single game farm would have to be registered for TOPS before you could do any movement. How long would that take our nature conservation officials? Would that have been implemented by the 1st of April? Considering we had blue wildebeest, black blesbuck and plain zebra all listed. It was argued that it would only be for properties that had blue and black wildebeest, but we raised the question, I'm sitting in the Eastern Cape, my neighbour's got black wildebeest, I've got blue wildebeest. Oh no, then you need to have a DNA inspection on all your animals before you can move them. But there's a buffer fence. No, but there's a risk of contamination. We asked the state, where is the data to show hybridization of these species? Our answer was, maar julle as weer is al met daai data het, julle moet mos weet. They've got no data. So that's what we are sitting with. So ultimately, on the 11th hour, the minister agreed to repeal the TOPS regulations, which was a first for the industry, and it was a first for our legal team as well. Because everything in an urgent court application is 50-50 at best. So that means our case was substantially strong and that we had our facts in order. Where we're sitting at the moment and we're getting legal opinion about is the hunting quota for elephant, leopard and black rhino, and we're considering bringing an urgent application in against the department again. Because we're sitting now on the 20th of May and we don't have a hunting quota for this year. It's costing us millions of rands of income because high value animal species can't be harvested. We've got members here that have lost 4 or 5 black rhino in the process waiting for a permit because they messed up in 2021 with issuing us a quota. They deferred it to the beginning of 2022. The Humane Society took them to court and we lost that quota. So we've actually sat 3 years to date without a quota, costing our industry millions. What was interesting from our TOPS court case, and it was something I didn't expect, the Humane Society contacted our legal team and said, why did you also not include us in your legal proceedings? I forget what the correct term is, cite them in our legal proceedings. To which our lawyers said, well, why must we? You guys have got no bearing. So what we do anticipate and what we're preparing for is when we bring this case based on quotas, that we are going to get pushback from the Humane Society who brought their case last year, and we're going to have to prove it. Point number 3, the compensation policy in the for human-wildlife conflict in KZN. I don't know how many of you have heard about it or read about it. This is a huge issue for WRSA that we're busy addressing at the moment. They've basically brought in that this fund will be funded through the private sector through levies and fines. But here's where the kicker comes in. The fund only pays out for animals that escape from public parks. Should an animal be proven to escape from a private game reserve, you will be held personally liable and the fund is not there to support you. So you've got to pay into an insurance fund, but you've got no cover for that fund. It's only to cover the state. And should you not compensate those people that for some animal escaping from your property, you'll get no permits or P3 exemptions. So we've already drafted quite a strong legal letter that will be finalized and go off on Monday and distributed to all of you as members, saying that if you proceed with this process, which is already fatally flawed. To give you an example, the policy was initially proposed by Tuli Mononzela in her Public Protector's report in 2014. In 2015 to 2018, Ezemvelo took that very report to court. I don't know who's advising Ezemvelo because they totally misread the judgment, where the judgment said if you implement this policy, it's against law and against all rationality, but yet they're proceeding. So it's something that we'll also be forced to challenge. In terms of the white paper, we are yet to see it gazetted, but we have had confirmation that it's been approved, and we've managed to get hold of a copy that obviously isn't gazetted, so we don't want to circulate a copy that hasn't got the official stamp on it yet, and we have got key members looking at it. What is clear is that the draft white paper has got a unique stance. It's looking at animal welfare and animal well-being that we'll discuss now. And a lot of the things that we proposed last year has clearly been omitted. We're already sitting on a much stronger foot than we were this time last year because, again, we've served legal papers or legal response regarding this draft white paper to the Minister through our legal team. The Lion Task Team that was established, I'll run through some slides quickly that I gave as a presentation to the Lion Task Team. They've been established to determine the voluntary exit of the lion breeders in South Africa. So to give you guys an example of the presentation I gave, the first thing that I made perfectly clear is that although I as the CEO represent WRSA, I have no mandate to discuss the voluntary surrender or disposal of private assets that do not belong to me or WRSA without the authorized mandate of our members, something which I do not have. So we made it clear, we said no members have asked WRSA formally regarding an exit. Only one member after the fact came and said, will you support us? And here's the argument of the entire situation. That member that's asked us to support them is the Kraus brothers. Former Game Ranch Breeder of the Year, 2014, WRSA Game Ranch Breeder of the Year. So we made it perfectly clear to the department. All you've achieved is you haven't got rid of the rotten apples. You've taken the best of the best and you're asking them to exit. You're not changing any status quo. Your net's catching the wrong person. However, we have received several members asking WRSA to seek legal counsel to challenge the process, something which we are doing. We highlighted to the department that the entire captive lion breeding industry has happened under their authority, their administration, their regulation and their guidance. And we also pointed out that according to the Scientific Authorities report, captive lion breeding trophies and captive bred lion for zoological breeding purposes are not detrimental to the wild population of South Africa. For those who are unaware, the lion population in South Africa is structured into 3 tiers. We've said captive is structured into ranch, commercial and sanctuaries, and that we also need to look at those sanctuaries, not just the captive ranch breeding. So we asked them, where do we draw the line between captive and not captive? What is captive, what is not captive? What is wild, what is not wild? You've got your different wildness notes. I'm not going to go into that, not for the sake of time. We asked, what is conservation, what is not conservation? Considering that 80% of the lion population are in private hands and 20% in government. We spoke about the management plan that government brought out in 2015 for lions that they're yet to implement. They haven't got the budget. So if you haven't got the budget to implement your own management plan for your own managed lions and game reserves, how are you going to supply the voluntary exit of private side? We referred to the 40% of all park rangers in Kruger National Park been involved in some form of money laundering. We recently got statistics that 83 positions within Kruger National Park vacant for rangers will not be filled. So their own parks are falling apart. We highlighted the 70% population decline. We said, when do we draw the line between commercial and not commercial? Donate Now is still commercial. You're still exploiting that line, you're just exploiting it on a different platform. We asked the question about welfare, not welfare, and we used this specific picture. We said if this was any one of our members of WRSA, what would happen? We'd be prosecuted by the NSPCA for animal welfare concerns. But because it's in Kruger National Park, it's fine, it's natural. We can let that line be in that condition, which is unacceptable for us. We asked, when do we draw the line between domesticated, not domesticated? Here we use this slideshow again to show that could have been killed. That line's absolutely domesticated in our point. And finally, the last point that we said, where do you draw the line between caged and not caged? To just change one cage for another is not conservation. And that's what the suggestion is. Apparently one rich NGO from overseas has said it will take 2,000 captive bred lions. We said to the task team, oh wow, that's amazing. Where have you guys identified habitat the size of Kruger National Park for these lions? No, we haven't. I said, well, where are they going to go? No, they're going to go into sanctuaries. So I said, but how does that benefit conservation? You're taking it from one avenue saying it's for conservation purposes that you're taking it away, and you're just putting it in sanctuaries. That is not conservation, and that's not benefiting it. So in conclusion, we've also got the Wildlife Welfare Forum. I don't know how many of you have heard of that. That was drafted by the Minister. Recently, their terms of reference was approved 2 weeks ago. So they've now got to draft their own terms of reference. But what is a concern for us is that a process that has been going on since 2018 in the NEMBLA bill is well-being has now been brought into our NEMBLA regulations. Means the holistic circumstances and conditions of an animal which are conducive to its physical, physiological and mental health and quality of life, including its ability to cope with its environment. They've also brought in that the NEMBLA bill must consider the well-being of animals in the management, conservation and sustainable use thereof. Now, something people do not understand is we as game ranchers, well-being and animal welfare is our #1 priority. Because if our animals are in a poor condition, they're not producing, they're not breeding, we are not profitable. You don't need a law to force us to employ animal welfare. But what scares us the most as WRSA is that under section 45(9)(a), the Minister may by notice in the Gazette and subject to such conditions as the Minister may specify in her notice, prohibit any activity that may negatively impact on the well-being of an animal. And where we've got huge concerns is maybe the hunting industry. So that's why we continuously on all our wildlife forum meetings ask, do we support sustainable use? Yes. Fine, in the minutes. Do we support sustainable use? Do we support hunting? Yes. And we get those in our minutes. Through our legal team, we've also done a lot of PIE requests, and this is to show the ludicrousy of the welfare forum. The one question we asked is, please can you advise us where there's been animal welfare neglect within our industry? To which the Department of Environment said, no, ask the Department of Agriculture. To which the Department of Agriculture said, no, they don't keep the records, ask the NSPCA. To which the NSPCA said, we don't have any, we're not answering. That's the situation we're sitting with the welfare issues. We also asked about zoonotic transfer. And they responded to say, you mean zoonotic disease, because a lot of COVID situations now be conflated with the wildlife industry. And they said they do not have any records thereof. In terms of the Wildlife Forum, we as an industry are being put under a lot of pressure, especially with transformation. Recently we were told that we need to sign an agreement as WRSA that we commit 35,000 animals for transformation. Immediately I rejected that and I made the following comment. Our industry's total turnover from game auctions a year is 40,000 animals. You want us as the industry to commit to 35,000, that's 1 year's turnover of animals for transformation. For what benefit? Who benefits? Through another PIE application we also asked, we said, you're bringing out this white paper because we apparently damaging brand South Africa. Please give us one example of how we're damaging brand South Africa. They listed the following report: an assessment of the potential risk and practice of intensive and selective breeding of game biodiversity and the biodiversity economy in South Africa. Here's where it gets funny for me. The task team, Lazan Nell, SA Hunters. Contributing authors, Gerard Verdoren, SA Hunters. External reviewers, Prof. Brian Riley, SA Hunters. The crux of it all in red, report funded by SA Hunters. Is that a peer-reviewed document? The same way you can have a look, if you have a look, highlighted in green is Ezemvelo and highlighted in blue is Sandby. Sandby, Ezemvelo and SA Hunters funded the report. So 7 out of the 8 authors funded that report. So is that a peer-reviewed process? We raised these questions in the Wildlife Forum, to which obviously SA Hunters took objection. We put everything on paper. It's now 2 months later and we're yet to hear a response. But we'll wait for it and we'll answer it accordingly. We also asked the department, we said, while you don't recognize our animals with tops, that's why you're putting sable on tops. When we donate these animals, do our animals also transform in status, in conservation status, that they now also become wild? They couldn't answer us. In terms of legal support for WRSA members, this year alone, and I'd like to encourage you to utilize this, WRSA has spent in excess of 150,000 Rand giving members legal advice of what to do in permit situations, permit violations, various situations that we're sitting in. If you've got an issue, contact us. We cannot do something for you if you are silent. Let the office know what your frustrations are. To give you an example, what's recently happened, one of our members 2 weeks ago, her farm was raided, her fences were cut down, her lodge was burnt down. It took a process of 3 days for this to happen. If we had known as an industry, we could have really brought an urgent interdict to force the police to do their job, because she couldn't get hold of the police. The police were refusing to pitch. What makes this situation a little bit unique is it was communal land and it was a game farmer on communal property that had been given rights through the chief. So it's not a specific game farm that had been invaded or taken over. So this is something we'll be bringing to our AGM, where we'll be asking our members permission to create a fund and to look at a way of mechanizing support for our members, that should there ever be something to happen with land invasions or land grabs, that you've got the WRSA's national office and national lawyers at your full disposal to support you and to support your lawyers on the ground to bring an urgent interdict for the police to force them to protect your rights and your property. So that's something we'll be bringing to our AGM. We've also done a lot of work behind the scenes with Agility Agri, and please, Raymond's here, so please contact him. There's a policy that he's brought out that is Agility Agri that protects you and looks after your health and the members' health of your employees. Then final note, on 13th and the 14th of October, please save the date. This is where we'll have our WRSA annual AGM, national auction and gala dinner and award ceremony. It will be in Pretoria, so that's the Friday and the Saturday. If you guys can all please diarise that, that'd be of great support. And then on a final note, I'd like to apologize. I will be doing a little bit of a hit and run at lunchtime because I have to be in Sun City this afternoon for the WFO, the World Farmers Organization General Assembly, which will be taking place. And that's why both Gerard and Colin, our chairman and vice chairman, could unfortunately not be here today. So they do express their apologies. But in a nutshell, that's where we are sitting on the legal side, and what we're looking at is WRSA. And don't view this as negative. My role as the CEO of WRSA is to ensure your right to do business. That's why I've got to address these issues and come up with solutions and work out as best way we can possibly serve our members and ensure you can continue to do business. So unless there's any questions, please enjoy lunch, and thank you very much for all the support. The registration, Johan will still be here available after lunch for anyone who still wants to register. Please do, get yourself on the system. Because if we don't have your data as a global collective, we can't argue for your rights as game farmers. So unless there's any questions, thank you very much. Right, thank you. I don't see any questions unless I'm missing a hand. Thank you very much. Enjoy lunch.